Guenther Family History, Uncle Don's Big Toe by Donald Guenther. Early in his junior year in high school, Uncle Don was playing touch football with his three brothers. Trying to keep from getting touched, he flipped, landing on his shoulder, and he broke his collarbone. He ran to the house, yelling for help. Grandma wanted to take him to the doctor's, but Grandpa wasn't sure. Grandpa raised Uncle Don's arm above his head, and Uncle Don let a few words fly that convinced Grandpa he needed to have it checked out. Turns out, Uncle Don did indeed have a broken collarbone. During Uncle Don's recovery, Uncle Ed broke his arm, and Uncle Dave broke his hand. Grandma took them all to church one Sunday, and she had to ask for help when she found out she had a flat tire. That was the year, too, that Uncle Don started getting interested in girls. He had a steady and could only think of her. He spent a good deal of his time with her. One night in early June, we all heard gunshots. It was dark. Grandma feared someone had been shot near our rural home. Next morning, Uncle Don got dressed and put on his new sandals to head over to his girlfriend's house. Grandma said nothing doing until he completed his chores. One of the chores was to mow the front lawn. With dew still on the grass, he started in on it. He was in a hurry to get the job done so he could see his girl. All Uncle Don could think about was his girl. Just as he headed down the hill, beside the walnut tree, he slipped in the wet grass. He pushed the mower up, and both feet went under the mower. The first blade edge took off his left big toe and the ends of his right foot. The second blade edge couldn't get through his left ankle, and the mower stalled. Screaming and shouting for help, he limped for the door. Inside the house, Grandma heard Uncle Don's shouts. Fearing he'd found a dead body from the gunshots the night before, Grandma sent Uncle Ed out to check things out. As Uncle Don neared the house, and just before he hit the sidewalk Grandpa had put in, he and Uncle Ed met up. Uncle Ed took one look at Uncle Don's feet and froze. They were a bloody mess! Uncle Don headed toward the house. Grandma looked out the window and grabbed the car keys. Together, Grandma and Uncle Don drove to the hospital. Uncle Don screamed the whole way. When they got to the hospital, they put Uncle Don under, and Dr. Holbarth went to work. When Uncle Don came to, he was in a hospital bed. Dr. Holbarth said he couldn't save the whole toe, but tried to save what he could. Uncle Don spent 9 days in the hospital with his feet elevated. His family and friends visited him. The most painful part of the whole ordeal was when he got constipated. Not to go into the details on that one. Suffice to say, he suffered tremendously. Dr. Holbarth removed the bandages after 9 days. What was left of the big toe had turned all black. Dr. Holbarth said he'd have to remove it. Dr. Holbarth told Uncle Don he might end up being a step and a half for the rest of his life. Uncle Don got depressed. Dr. Holbarth was a nice guy and started watching Uncle Don's football practices to make sure he was doing okay. After the surgery, Uncle Don got rested up for a day. But then his phantom toe started to itch. He couldn't scratch it. He thought he'd go insane. His brothers thought that Tiny, the family's St. Bernard, had eaten Uncle Don's big toe, and watched as Uncle Don petted Tiny. Tiny did seem friendlier than normal, possibly sensing Uncle Don's stress. Our St. Bernard Tiny's uncle was Neil on the TV show Topper. Uncle Don left the hospital in mid-June weighing 150 pounds. He started lifting weights and got his growth spurt. By mid-August he was 208 pounds and went out for football tough as nails. He started that year as the center defensive lineman for Marshfield. In the 5th game he broke his hand. Uncle Don wasn't near the athlete as his younger brother Ed, so the loss to the family wasn't really noted. At that time, Uncle Don was more interested in girls than in football, so he was happy too. He is not in a step and a half, thankfully. Uncle Ed finally thawed out from the shock, and he became a football star. Grandma later figured the night shots must have been deer poachers.